Hey, what's up, hipsters? Episode 7 of Commander Brewsday. I'm your host, as always, Blake. And today, we're going to be talking about a deck from a commander from a couple sets ago. I've been kind of looking through Brothers War stuff, and not a lot has really interested me. A lot of the commanders that are kind of released from the set are pretty generically powerful and easy to build around, where they don't ask much of you, just play artifacts or whatever. So I've been a little uninspired with Brothers War commanders. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're very good, but just as for the purposes of this show, I typically like to build around commanders that don't get a lot of love that should. So today we're going to go back a few sets. We're going to go back to New Capenna. We're going to talk about Jaxis. This is a list that I brewed up for a buddy of mine. Shout out to Bobby, who had a Jaxis deck before, and he was looking to kind of get my input on it and see what I would do with it. And this is just a deck that I just built from scratch. I didn't really go off of his list or anything. This is basically a list that I was going to make, and then he could compare to his list, and then we'd see kind of where it'd fall and, maybe give him some ideas. So yeah, this is built around Jaxis today. And kind of our focus is around threat and effects, which are, it's an old term. It's used for, many people use it for different things, active trees and that sort of stuff. It's just temporarily taking your opponent's creature until end of turn, and then untapping it, giving it haste. That's what threatened effects are. But yeah, we'll get into it. Since it's Brewsday, I got a drink on me. Today I'm not sticking with a brew. I got some Maker's Mark, some whiskey. Let me know what y'all are drinking. And then also I got a little cherry Coke over here to supplement. So cheers to y'all, and then we'll get into it. Alright, so Jaxis, what does she do? Jaxis is 3 and a red for a 2/3 human warrior. You can pay a red, tap, and discard a card. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. Then it also has Blitz for 1 and a red. Blitz is essentially what the first ability does. It comes out with haste. You sack out the end step, and when it dies, you draw a card. So Jaxis basically just allows you to blitz creatures that are on the battlefield at the low cost of 1 red mana and a card, but then you get your card back when the thing that you put into play dies, the token copy. So okay, really cool commander. Lots to do here. Pretty open-ended. All it asks for you is just to have creatures and cards in your hand, and then it'll help you out doing the rest. So like I said, I decided to build around threat and effects. So a lot of obviously this deck's mostly based around creatures. So what I was mostly looking for was creatures that would take your opponent's creatures when they entered. So that way we can get like pseudo insurrection effects and take all of our opponent's stuff and be able to swing in pretty freely. And then I even included a few sack outlets, so that way we don't have to give them their creatures back. We can just get rid of them before we have to give them back. And then lastly, the kind of final moving piece here, excuse me, is that I was originally looking at like extra combat stuff, because in my head I was thinking, oh, extra combat stuff, a lot of it untaps your creatures and then you get an extra combat, and then it's like, okay, cool, we can activate Jaxis again before we swing again. But turns out a lot of the extra combat effects are usually untap attacking creatures or creatures that attack this turn, and typically we're going to be activating Jaxis and she's not going to be attacking. So I mean, that doesn't make them not good, but it just means that I didn't want to include them as much, as it doesn't really do as much. It doesn't lean into the synergies that we're exactly looking for the deck, but you will see a few that do that effect, and ideally they'd be on creatures. So yeah, we'll get into it. First, we'll just go through category by category. I didn't decide to add any tags on it this time around. So we got 26 creatures. We got a mix of just big chungas that we want to copy, to creatures that come in and steal creatures, to just generally good things. So let's start it off with Ancient Copper Dragon, Baldur's Gate card. 4 red for a 6/5 flyer. It's an Elder Dragon. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Notably, this is not legendary, so when we make a copy of it, we'll get to attack with it immediately and hopefully attack with its sidekick, this as well. With most of the big chungus we got in the deck, like Ancient Copper Dragon, ideally you have Jaxis out, you have 7 mana, you play this, then you immediately copy it and swing in with the token copy. And then you might even have an effect in your graveyard like Anger, which we can easily discard with our commander, which is 3 and a red for a 2/2 haste. And as long as it's in your graveyard and you control a mountain, your creatures you control have haste. This is really good pitch fodder to our commander. Helps us enable a lot of really crazy attacks out of nowhere. Also, it includes our commander, since our commander doesn't naturally have haste. The only way it has haste is if we blitz it, which we ideally don't want to do because we don't really want to sack Jaxis. We'd rather have it stay around. So Anger is a perfect card for the deck. Next up, Atsushi the Blazing Sky. 2 red for a 4/4 Dragon Spirit. It has flying and trample. When it dies, you choose one, exile top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards, or you create 3 treasure tokens. Notably, this one is legendary. However, having it die is kind of a good thing. Both of these effects that it gives are great. Extra mana or extra cards, both are stellar. Notably, a lot of times what we'd probably want to do is actually sack the real card, this one, and then let the token stay and get its attack and then sack it. Because then we get 2 dice triggers of our Atsushi that turn, and we still get a card back as well from the token dying. So this is definitely a cute one. Even the legendary is almost an upside here. So yeah, Atsushi, great card, just a generally good card, excellent for the deck. Coercive Recruiter, 4 and a red for a 4/3 Orc Pirate. Whenever it or another pirate enters the battlefield under your control, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature until end of turn, it gains haste and becomes a pirate in addition to its other types. So one really important thing to note about active trees and threatened effects is that a lot of them can target your own creature. In this case, we could target our own Jaxis to untap it and then activate it again. So a kind of loop you can get into with this if you have a decent number of cards in hand and things that you want to take is you can play this with 5, use it to untap Jaxis, activate Jaxis, target this again, and then it creates a new token copy, and then you have 2 triggers. You have this trigger, you have the trigger from the token that entered, and then you also have the Coercive Recruiter, the original one, to trigger to untap and steal something. So this can be a sort of cascading effect. The more mana that you have, the more copies of this you can make, the more things you can keep taking and untapping your Jaxis over and over again. So this is a really cute card that can do some fun little loops. It's pretty mana intensive and it does want you to have a decent number of cards in hand. But even just in general, this is a fine effect for our deck. This is kind of what we're looking for. Combat Celebrant, a very combo-y card in its own right. Combat Celebrant is 2 and a red for a 4/1 human warrior. If it hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So notably, you can play this, copy it with Jaxis immediately, attack with the token copy, and exert it, and then do your Jaxis activation again. Do whatever you want to do. You know, lots of different levers you can kind of pull here. Including that if you attack with multiple combat celebrants at a turn, you don't have to exert them all at once. You can exert one of them, then untap the other ones. Then when that next one attacks, you can exert that one. Because you choose whether it exerts or not when it attacks. So you can kind of get some flexibility there. So yeah, Combat Celebrant is a pretty scary card. We're not really going to like infinite combat people with this deck or anything. I didn't really put any combos in this deck. It'd be pretty easy to put like a Kiki Jiki with some of our steel creatures in, but I just wanted to just have a fun red deck that is really reliable and strong, but that doesn't really have the potential to combo. But yeah, Combat Celebrant, great extra combat card. It's on a creature, and it does the thing that we want to do, which it untaps all of our creatures, not just the ones that attacked, so we can get Jaxis activations again and such. Combustible Gearhulk. Not typically a card that I like a whole lot, as you've probably heard me say in other videos, but it seems like a good home here. 4 red for 6/6 first strike. It's an artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If that player doesn't, you mill 3 cards, then it deals damage equal to the total mana value among the cards you milled to that player. This is a great card to copy. Our opponents are probably going to take damage once or twice from them, but as soon as we start copying this very much, it's going to be they're going to be disincentivized to take the damage, and then hopefully we'll get quite a few cards out of it. So good one to copy. Decent little creature here. Conspiracy Theorist. 1 and a red for a 2/2 human shaman. When it attacks, you may pay 1 generic. If you do, you can discard a card and then draw a card. And then whenever this is a separate effect on its own. Whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards, you may exile one of them from your graveyard. If you do, you may cast it this turn. So this kind of makes us not go down on cards when we activate our Jaxis, as well as it gives us some extra looting in the meantime if we need it. But more importantly, we can just loot away cards that we plan on casting already that turn, and then we don't really go down any cards because we get our card back whenever we sacrifice the token that Jaxis makes at the end of turn. So just a good little role player in our deck to help us not, that help us kind of go up cards in a way. And kind of the same thing here with Containment Construct. It's a 2-mana 2/1 artifact creature construct. Whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn. So notably, this one, unlike Conspiracy Theorist, actually allows you to play it so you can discard lands pretty freely and then play them on your second main or whatever you want to do. Or just do it right then, you know what I mean? So yeah, 2 really good role players here to make sure that we kind of don't go down on cards. And then just notice the differences here where Conspiracy Theorist only lets you cast spells and Containment Construct lets you play cards so you can play lands and such. Next up, Delina Wild Mage. 3 and a red for a 3/2 Elf Shaman. It's a legendary. When it attacks, you may choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. Then 1 through 14, you create a tapped attacking creature that's a copy of that token, except it's not legendary. Sorry, and it has exile this creature at the end of combat. Then if you hit a 15 or 20, you get to do it again. So yeah, just a good card. Once again, copies lots of creatures we care about. ETB, steal creatures, deal damage, draw cards, extra attacks and stuff like that. So lots of cool things to be done with Delina Wild Mage here. Can randomly make a couple token copies of something really good like Combustible Gearhulk or Sushi or whatever. So yeah, really cool card. Love the card. Seems to fit in the kind of themes of the deck that we're playing. Dire Fleet Daredevil, 1 and a red for a 2/1 first strike. It's a human pirate, notably. When it enters the battlefield, exile target instant or sorcery card from your opponent's graveyard. You may cast it this turn, and you may spend mana or mana of any color to cast that spell, and then you exile it after you cast it. So yeah, pretty cool card. Basically, it gives us some extra flexibility. If our opponents are playing rampant card draw, we can kind of snag those when we see fit. And we can use it kind of as a little bit of graveyard hate and stuff like that. But notably, it allows us to kind of cast Rampant Growth and stuff like that, which we normally don't have access to. And it's, not the worst card to copy. So, cool little card here. Dockside Extortionist. You may have heard of it. It's kind of broken. We're playing red, so we play Dockside. Fanatic of Mogus. 3 and a red for a 4/2 Minotaur Shaman. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each opponent equal to your devotion to red. And we are a pretty pip-heavy deck here, as we have quite a few creatures, and then even a few enchantments. So this can definitely be a pretty solid win condition for us. Gives us some extra reach if combat isn't really working out. So yeah, excellent card. Good role player. Feldon of the Third Path. 1 red for a 2/3 legendary creature, Human Artificer. You can pay 2 and a red and tap to create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard. Except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, and then you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This is probably a card that you've seen in games before, but if you're not familiar, it's kind of like a weird red reanimator sort of card. It targets a creature in a graveyard. It doesn't exile the creature, so you can do it basically every turn if you want to. And it gives the thing haste, so you get all the ETBs, attacks, triggers, all that stuff immediately. This one's a little mana intensive and kind of slow. But you'll usually want a few effects like this where they're just really solid value, even if they are slow or fragile in your deck, just to have good, consistent, reliable advantage if the game goes long. And 3 mana for an effect like that is not the worst to invest in. So Feldon is just going to be a good value / role player card in the deck. Furbolg Futilist, 4 red for a 4/4 Giant Bard. It's from Baldur's Gate, so it's going to be a card you've never heard of before. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature you don't control until end of turn. Untap it. It gains haste and myriad until end of turn. Wow, this one could be scary. Obviously, it's pretty mana intensive here at 6 mana. But this can produce a lot of damage, ETB, all sorts of stuff out of nowhere. If we take our opponent's Meteor Golem or whatever, all of a sudden we're going to get so many triggers when it attacks and remove blockers out of the way and all sorts of great stuff that you can do with this. The ceiling on this card seems quite high. Myriad is a pretty powerful effect to just randomly give to something. 6 mana is pretty intensive, but this is the kind of thing that we're looking to do, so seems like a good fit here. Imperial Recruiter, just a good toolboxy sort of card. You know me, I like to put this in a lot of my red decks. It gets all sorts of things from dockside extortionists to conspiracy theorists and containment construct. You know, anger even if we want to be able to pitch that. So yeah, Imperial Recruiter. You know, I put it in a lot of my red decks. Seems like a good fit here as well. Good role player. Red doesn't have many ways to tutor, so this is a really solid one. Impulsive Pilferer. 1 red mana for 1/1. It's a Goblin Pirate. When it dies, create a treasure token. It has Encore for 3 and a red. Just seems like a good card to pitch to our commander early on. If we have a Sack Outlet or a Skull Clamp or something already in hand, we'll get to those later, obviously. Then it's a card we can actually play out and sack for value. But generally, this is a card that we can pitch to Jaxis and then Encore it later for some extra value. So yeah, Impulsive Pilferer, just a good role player, nothing crazy. Inferno Titan, 4 red for a 6/6. It has Fire Breathing, which means it has you can pay red to give it an extra power until end of turn. And more importantly, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, deals 3 damage divided as you choose. So yeah, this card is great card to copy. Real scary card, can clean up the board of lots of garbage blockers, or just go upstairs for a lot of damage. Especially once we're like, if we ever, give it like Myriad with like the Furbolg Feudalist or something. A lot of things that can be done with Inferno Titan. Just a really good, solid red beater. Good role player in the deck for sure. Molten Primordial. This is one of our better top end cards. 5 red for a 6/4 with haste. It's an avatar. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain haste until end of turn. So yeah, this is just a mass active treason effect. Big idiot, takes some stuff. It has haste. It gives all those things haste. Gets lots of blockers out of the way. If we ever copy it, our opponents are going to quickly run out of things to take /block with, so we're going to get in for a ton of damage. Really good card for the deck. This is exactly what we want to be doing. Morag, Fury of Akum, 4 red for a 6/6 legendary creature Minotaur Warrior. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 until for each time it attacks this turn. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. Beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So really, once again, another great creature. Gives us extra combats, but this one importantly untaps all of our creatures, which is great. Notably, you want to do this. You want to play your land during your second main phase, because the effect untaps the creatures when you play the land. So if you play your land during your first main, then go to it'll give you an extra combat, but you're not going to get the untap before that combat because the untap happens when you play the land. So your play pattern is first main, do whatever you want to do on your first main, activate your Jaxis, whatever. Then you go combat, do my attacks. Okay, cool. Second main, play my land, trigger, untap my creatures. Then I get an additional combat phase. So then I can activate my Jaxis, do all my things again. So yeah, just know the play pattern of this card before you play it. It's really awkwardly worded, but that's how it works. You want to play your land during your second main phase. That's how you get the untap, and then you get your extra combat. But all that being said, great card. Like I said, the extra combats that we want them to untap all of our creatures, not just the ones that attacked, and it's on our creature body. So this is all the things that we want, and it gives us extra power when we attack. So great card. Ox of Agonis, card I enjoy quite a bit. It's 3 red for a 4/2 Ox. When it enters the battlefield, you discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. And more importantly, it has escape for red, and then you exile 8 cards from your library. And then when you escape, it enters with a 1/1 counter, so it's a 5/3. This is just a really good card to pitch to Jaxis early on, and it can kind of sit out there for a while. And then if we run low on cards, we can escape it from our graveyard and get a new hand when we're down to 1 or 0 cards. And then it's also just a card that's like fine to copy later as we kind of keep expending our cards. It's just a good card advantage engine when we run out of things to do. And it's a card that we can just pitch away early to Jaxis if we need to. So Ox of Agonis, really good card for this deck, I think. Really good role player for sure. Next up, Port Razor, 3 red for a 4/4 Orc Pirate. When it deals combat damage to a player, untap each creature you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, and Port Razor can't attack a player it has already attacked this turn. So notably, the one awkward thing here with Port Razor is even though it untaps all of our creatures, you can only activate Jaxis' ability as the sorcery. So this one doesn't exactly take advantage of the untap the creature thing quite as well as Morag does. That being said, this one can definitely still push a lot of damage in very quickly, especially if we're removing blockers, which we are. Oh, and then this can't attack a player that has already attacked this turn. So it basically gives you up to 3 extra combats. So anyway, that being said, yeah, just a really good card, especially if you're good at removing blockers and getting this in there, which we are good at doing, I think. Seems like a perfect fit for our deck. And then we can even activate Jaxis on our second main after all of our combats are over if we want to. So yeah, Port Razor, great extra combat card for us. Professional Facebreaker, 2 in a red for a 2/3 menace human warrior. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token. You can sack a treasure token, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Really good mana / card advantage engine for our deck. It's evasive. It's really good if we can remove blockers and consistently hit each opponent on each combat, which we should be able to do pretty reliably. So yeah, really good role player. Great card. Just the floor of this card is just so high. Seems like a great fit for our deck. And it's a good card to copy too. These stack really well. And it's not legendary. So yeah, great card to copy. Good role player in the deck. Just really solid floor for this card. Solemn Simulacrum. Everybody knows what this one does, but this is a good source of card advantage for us. Ramps us, we copy it, gets us extra lands that we sack, and then draw multiple cards. Yeah, just a really solid role player for the deck. Squee Goblin Nabob. Speaking of a solid role player, 2 in a red for a 1/1. Legendary creature Goblin. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may return Squee from your graveyard to your hand. So this is just a card that we can free pitch to our commander every single turn and never go down on cards. So that's just great. That's something that we want. Not very many cards like this. Fits our deck just perfectly. Terror of the Peaks, an absolute monster of a card. 3 red for a 5/4 dragon with flying. Spells your opponents cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast, so it has ward pay 3 life basically. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals damage equal to its power to any target. We're really good at having creatures enter, it turns out. We play a lot of creatures, a lot of big creatures, so this can deal a lot of damage. This is a great card to copy with Jaxis. It's a good card to follow up copying something else after we play this with Jaxis. Yeah, this card can just sling around a lot of damage really quickly. It's a must deal with threat, and we have a lot of creatures enter the battlefield under our control, so seems like a great card for the deck. Zealous Conscripts, the last of the creatures, 4 in a red for a 3/3 with haste, human warrior. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent until end of turn. Untap that permanent, it gains haste till end of turn. So with a lot of these effects, we can use these. I didn't mention this as earlier, but we can use these as kind of pseudo wheel effects if we have extra red mana. We can use this to untap our commander, activate our commander again, target this, keep untapping our commander with this, and pitch basically our whole hand as long as we have red mana to spare. And at the end step, when we sack all those token copies, we will, get all of our cards back. Plus, we'll have a bunch of 3/3s that can attack, so that's kind of cute. But this is part of the reason these sort of effects are why I didn't include Kiki Jiki. It's a little easy to go infinite with Kiki Jiki in this deck, so I just didn't bother including it. But yeah, just a good card for the deck. Clears blockers, steals problematic permanents temporarily for us to sack, which we'll get to soon. Yeah, really good card, does all the things that we want to in our deck. We're going to skip over to artifacts next, since that's kind of the next important category. Our artifacts kind of consist of, obviously, mana ramp, or they consist of sort of utility cards, whether it's sack outlets or extra triggers, or, all that sort of stuff. So we'll go ahead and get into it. We got Arcane Signet. It's one of the better ramp cards in the format, so it's here. Battle Mage's Bracers, 2 in a red for a equipment. Equipped creature has haste. Whenever an ability of an equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, you can copy that ability, and you may choose new targets for the copy. And it has equip of 2. So yeah, this is just a good card. It's a good haste enabler, if nothing else, for our deck, for when we need it to. But more importantly, it can copy our triggers for our Jaxis, and we can target other things. We can target the same thing if we need to. So yeah, seems like a pretty sweet card for us. Really like what it's doing here. We don't have a ton of activated abilities outside of our commander. That being said, it seems like it's probably still worth it in general, I think. Because the floor here is kind of that it gives haste, and then it can give us some insane value with our commander as well. So that's really nice. But yeah, for that reason, since it basically only works with our commander, I didn't bother including some of the other cards that work with activated abilities, like Rings of Bright Hearth and that sort of stuff. Didn't feel like it was worth going that deep in, but the haste here is really nice just in general, and then the extra thing of being able to copy triggers is nice. Cursed Mirror. It's a 2 and a red for an artifact. Taps red mana. But more importantly, when it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except it has haste. So it becomes a temporary copy of any creature on the battlefield with haste. That's just really great. It's really hard for me not to include this in mono red decks nowadays. Most of the time, just having a one turn, one shot with a creature is all that you need. If you get a copy of somebody's Sun Titan and give it haste, you get tons of value there. Lots of things to be done with Cursed Mirror, and then it just becomes a mana rock after that turn, which is great. That's the thing that you want. But yeah, it's just really nice. It can temporarily become a copy of an opponent's creature, and then you can copy this with Jaxis and do it again. So a lot to be done with this card. Good flexible card for the deck, and secretly pretty powerful, I think. Everflowing Chalice, it's a mana rock, just like Felwar Stone. We need them in the deck, so they're here. Idol of Oblivion. It's 2 generic for an artifact. Taps to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you've created a token this turn. You can pay 8, tap, and sacrifice this to create a 10/10 colors. I'll draw a creature token, which you're probably never going to do. More importantly, what this is this is just consistent card draw for us. But if our commander starts getting kind of sniped a lot and getting sent back to the command zone a lot, then we can just pitch this to Jaxis' ability, and then it's no harm, no foul. But it's important to have cards like this in your deck where you can get consistent value, even if it's, kind of clunky and slow. Being able to get your extra card draws a turn, like Phyrexian Arenas and that sort of stuff, is pretty important, I think. So Idol of Oblivion is making the deck for now. Lightning Greaves. It's great for our deck. Enables haste as cheap as possible, and it protects our commander, so it's exactly what we want. Liquid Metal Torque. Great ramp card for our deck. We can kill artifacts here and there. So this can randomly help us shoot things that aren't artifacts that we might normally have problems getting rid of. So good ramp card. Mind Stone, same thing. Patriarch Seer. This is an interesting one. It's a 3 mana artifact. It taps for 1 mana of any color. But you can also pay 1 tap to untap target legendary creature you control. So we can use this to get another activation out of our Jaxis, which is really cool. But this is just a mana rock. Not the best mana rock, but it's got some cool flexibility, so I think it's worth a try here. Phyrexian Altar. It's 3 mana artifact. You can sack a creature to add 1 mana of any color. So this is great for our, sort of steal effects, so that way we don't have to give the creatures back to our opponents. As well as, allows us to reliably get our sacrifice triggers, or our creature dies triggers. So if somebody tries to, exile something and not allowing us to draw a card, then we can still at least get our card back out of it and get a mana and everything. So, yeah, just a powerful card. Allows us to get rid of creatures as we take them too. Prismatic Lens, it's a mana rock. Same thing with Ruby Medallion. Notably, Ruby Medallion can reduce more than 1 mana a turn, since we are a heavy red deck. So yeah, definitely probably the best mana rock in the deck, besides like Soul Ring, obviously. But yeah, Ruby Medallion, really powerful. These medallions are really powerful in monocolor decks. Skull Clamp, you know what this one does. We don't have a lot of 1/1s in the deck, but we do have a lot of creatures that die. So this will consistently get us card advantage. Seems like a nice card for the deck. Sundial the Infinite. This is a cool one. It's 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 tap to end the turn, but you can only do it during your turn. So what's important about this is it allows you to keep your token copies of things that Jaxis has created. However, your active treason sort of effects are still going to go back to your opponents because they aren't triggers. Like Jaxis is like the Blitz cards. They say sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So that's a trigger that you can, once it goes on the stack, end the turn with Sundial the Infinite. Then that trigger will cease to exist and you won't have to sack the thing. But creatures that temporarily gain control of things, such as the Firbolg Feudalist says, enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature you don't control until end of turn. The end of turn happens even when you activate Sundial the Infinite. There's no getting around that. So it doesn't, stop that sort of stuff. It's our opponents are still going to get their creatures back. However, it allows us to keep our token copies of things. However, the token copies still have the ability that when they die, you draw a card. So we don't lose out on the card advantage. It just kind of gets delayed, but we get to keep the cool things. So all that being said, it's kind of a weird card, but it works really well in the deck. Swiftfoot Boots, same reason that Lightning Greaves is good in the deck. And then lastly, we have Thought Vessel and Wayfarer's Bauble for some more ramp. All right, so we'll go on to enchantments because there's only a couple of them. The first one's a pretty interesting one, Determined Iteration. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, you populate the token created this way gains haste, then you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So it's kind of like an activation of our commander. We activate our commander, get a token copy of something. Then when we go to combat, we get another copy of it. So that's just good. Really cheap effect here too, 2 mana. That's a really low cost here to ask for. So I think it's worth a shot. Been looking for a place to try this card out. Goblin Bombardment, one of the best sack outlets in the format. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment. Sacrifice a creature. This deals 1 damage to any target. Allows us to shoot a lot of little blockers that our opponents have lying around after we steal their creatures and sack them so that way they don't get them back. So yeah, Goblin Bombardment, just a really good sack outlet. Industrial Advancement. This is a pretty interesting one. It's 3 and a red for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the creature's mana value. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Pretty cute card. Not the most powerful card, but it does trigger immediately at the next end step, so you will get this effect immediately. It's a good way to sack our opponent's creatures and get some extra value, as it can cheat some creatures into play. So yeah, I think this card's worth a shot. Not the most powerful, but it's a pretty fun and interesting card, so I'm willing to try it out. Sneak Attack. This card is insanely powerful. 3 and a red for an enchantment. You can pay a red to put a creature from your hand on the battlefield. It gains haste, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So it just cheats a creature into play, allows us to get easy activations of Jaxis on things. Giving the creature haste is totally worth sacrificing at the beginning of the next end step. Extremely powerful card. This will make you like numero uno threat as soon as it comes out. So just be aware of that. Make sure you're ready to combat that a bit. But Sneak Attack, at any rate, is a perfect fit for the deck. Very powerful. Yeah, almost certainly the most powerful card in the deck for sure. But it seems like this is a good place for the power to sit, where I feel comfortable with it without like comboing off or anything. Next up is Warstorm Surge. 5 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Great. Same thing as Terror of the Peaks. We really want as much of this effect as we can. As long as it scales really well, you will see that Impact Tremors isn't here. Because we don't have like a bajillion creatures coming in. We just have a handful of big chonkers coming in each turn. So we'd rather have an effect like this rather than, you know, a Warstorm Surge sort of, or I just said it. Impact Tremors, there it is. God damn. But yeah, at any rate, we'd rather have an effect like this than that, even though Impact Tremors is really cheap. All right, we have instants and sorceries next. For our sorceries, we consist of mostly interaction, a little bit of card draw. Yeah, just cards that we need for the deck. First up is Blasphemous Act. You know what it does. We're red. We need a board wipe. It's about the best one we can get. Next up is Jeska's Will. Once again, insanely powerful red card. Does all the things that we need to do. Draws cards, creates us a lot of mana. That's great. We're mono red, so we'll have no problem spending the red mana. Reckless Endeavor. This is the next board wipe I usually go to in red when I play red nowadays. It's 5 red for a sorcery. You roll 2d12s, and then you choose one result. This deals damage to one of the results, and then you make treasures from the other result. Most of the time when I play this card, it's just a board wipe that gets me all, if not more, mana back in the form of treasures. Basically, every time I've played it, I've low rolled once with it, and it still killed the entire board and gave me like 3 or 4 treasures back. I rolled like a 3 and a 4 or something, and it still killed everything that I wanted to kill, and then I still made 4 treasures. So even in that case, it was still great. The floor for this card is obviously basically nothing, but that result is so almost impossible to hit that this card is definitely worth running. This card, most of the time, is just a complete blowout. It gets you all your mana back, kills everything. I've played this card dozens of times now, and I've never been unhappy with casting it. So yeah, this card is the truth. Try it out. I promise you. Next up, Seize the Day. 3 and a red for a sorcery. Untap target creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. And it even has flashback for 2 and a red. Excuse me. This is the perfect extra combat for us, as it allows us to untap our commander, get an additional combat phase and an additional main phase, so that way we actually can get another activation of Jaxis during that main phase if we'd rather not do it during the first main phase, or so on. So yeah, and it even has flashback, so if we have a ton of mana, we can cast this twice in a turn. We can also pitch this to Jaxis early if we need things to do, and then flash it back later. Yeah, this is a perfect card for the deck. It fits exactly what we want to be doing. Shatter Skull Smashing, X red for a sorcery. It deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, it deals twice that damage. And then more importantly, it's a modal DFC. Yay, we love modal DFCs. This card's great. It's just an untapped red source if you need it, and sometimes it's a removal spell, which is great. So yeah, if you're really desperate, you can cast this, but mostly it's a land. Shatter Skull Smashing is great. Play modal DFCs. Next card is Vandal Blast. We're red. We want to play Vandal Blast because it doesn't blow up artifacts and it interacts with artifacts. So it's good. Next up is Wheel of Fortune and Wheel of Misfortune. These are both here as ways to refill our hand. It seems likely that we can expend our hand pretty easily with this deck, but we do churn through our deck pretty reliably. So with the amount of, even though we won't be holding a lot of cards in our hand, we should be able to hit our wheels pretty reliably just by drawing and, playing the cards from our hand, drawing, discarding a lot, getting our card back, that sort of thing. So these are the more card draw that we want to lean into, and not necessarily like impulse draw, as we have a lot of big drops, and if we ever hit one with an impulse draw, it can be kind of awkward sometimes. And I don't really want to play like looting sort of effects like Seize the Spoils and Unexpected Windfall, although they are fine. We don't really go up cards, and they're kind of mana intensive, so, and we don't really have like that many discard synergies that we want to use. So I felt like these were pretty reliable ways for us to refill our hand at a pretty cheap mana cost, outside of the other ones that we've already covered in the creatures section. So lastly, we're going to go to instants. These are basically all just interaction. Chaos Warp, because we need ways to interact with spells, or not spells, but permanents, and red is really bad at that, and this is the best way that red has to deal with them. Similarly, Wild Magic Surge is a similar thing. I haven't got to test this card quite as much, but it's obviously designed for mono red, as it gets rid of, as you destroy target permanent opponent controls, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a permanent card that shares a card type with that permanent, and then they put that on the battlefield, and then the rest on the bottom in a random order. So it kind of does like a similar thing to Chaos Warp. Chaos Warp can technically make them whiff, as they can reveal an instant or sorcery, and then they don't put it into play, they just leave it on top. Well, Wild Magic Surge, they will get something, but it has to share a type with the thing that you blow up. So, I mean, this one is a little bit more dangerous, but it is cheaper, and it is still flexible. So it is still necessary, I think. So yeah, this one definitely needs more trial for me. I haven't really got a good opportunity to play it yet, but I think it seems like a necessary evil here. Deflecting Swat, just a staple of the format, protects our commander. The only time we really want to redirect spells is when it's targeting our commander or something important while our commander's out. So yeah, Deflecting Swat seems like an obvious include here. Tybalt's Trickery, it's a weird counter spell, has a million words on it. It basically counters a spell and gives them something else. Once again, probably a necessary evil for the deck, as we need to protect our things sometimes, or stop a game-winning card. So, and red is really bad at doing those things. So yeah, Tybalt's Trickery, necessary evil here. And then lastly in this section, we have Valakut Awakening. Yay, Nettle Modal DFC. This one is 3 for an instant, and you can put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many +1. So it gives us kind of an optional wheel if we need something to do, and you don't even go down a card because you draw the +1. Modal DFCs are great. This is one of the best ones in my opinion. So yeah, obvious include here for sure. All right, let's go to lands now to round out the rest of the deck. Basically, the land base consists of a handful of utility lands that seem like they were worth including. And then kind of the most important utility lands for us are Valakut and Terrain Generator. I'll read those a little closely. So that's why we don't have a ton of non-basic lands, and we have a lot of mountains, because we really want to reliably trigger these whenever we get them. So yeah, basically Valakut is a tapped land, and whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you could control at least 5 other mountains, you can have this deal 3 damage to any target, and it taps for a red. So when we play lands, it gives us ways to deal damage to things. So that's great. From a land slot, we aren't really, sacrificing anything to do that. Just having a tapped land in our deck seems great. And then next up, the other important one is Terrain Generator. It taps for a colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap to put a basic land from your hand into play tapped. So this allows us to allows us to get our mana out a little bit quicker than we normally would. Notably, we don't get the lands out of our deck, so we have to have them in hand. However, it still is worth ramping for sure. So yeah, for these 2 cards, that's why we have 23 mountains. Pretty high a number of basics, especially for a monocolor deck. But I didn't really find that many of the, non-basics were really worth including. So that's why I went a little bit more heavy on the basics. But yeah, that being said, our other non-basics we have are Ancient Tomb, very powerful land, gets us at mana ahead of curve, so obviously very good. Buried Ruin, taps for a colorless, or we can pay 2, tap and sack it to return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. We do have some pretty important artifacts in the deck, such as like Phyrexian Altar and stuff like that. Curse Mirror, we wouldn't mind getting back. So yeah, this seemed like it was a utility land slot worth using on this one. There's not often we will sack this when we draw it in a game, but the fact that we can is pretty important, I think. Castle Embereth, it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain, which we basically always will. It taps for a red, and you can pay 1 red and tap this to give creatures you control +1/+0 until end of turn. Not much cost here. It's an untapped red source, and then sometimes it can pump our team if we need something to do, so that's cool. Seems like it's worth trying out. Command Beacon, taps for a colorless, or we can tap and sack the beacon to put our commander from the command zone into our hand. Seems great. Seems like Jaxis will probably draw quite a bit of removal. She's only a 3/2, right? Yeah, a 2/3. She's only a 2/3, so she's pretty likely to die to most things. So being able to reliably get her back to hand and then maybe blitz her out and activate her immediately or something like that. It seems very likely that her command tax could get pretty high pretty quickly. So it seems like we'd want a Command Beacon. Emergent Zone, very powerful land. As you've heard me say before, I think people sleep on this land for sure. Taps for a colorless, or you could pay 1, tap and sack this to cast spells as though they had flashed this turn. Allows you to go over the top of people trying to interact with you or stop you from doing things. And it allows you to kind of get, interaction where you normally wouldn't. Allows your sorceries to interact on your opponent's turn, such as like flashing a Blasphemous Act or a Vandal Blast at a crucial time. And it's just an untapped colorless source, so you're not really sacrificing anything here. Speaking of sacrificing, High Market sacrifices creatures for a life, or you can tap for a colorless mana. Having a sack outlet in the land slot is very important. So yeah, this is great. Doesn't matter that all it does is give us a life. Just being able to sack a creature for no cost is very powerful for us. Myriad Landscape, it ramps us, and that's good. We have a few landfall payoffs like Morag in the deck too, so we'll take a tapped colorless source for that sort of advantage. Nykthos can generate us a ton of red mana if we have a bunch of devotion to red. Basically always play Nykthos in your mono-color decks. It's a very powerful land. Scavenger Grounds, taps for a colorless mana, or we can pay 2, tap and sack a desert to exile all cards from all graveyards. This is a desert, so it usually sacks itself. But yeah, importantly, this exiles graveyards from a land slot, which we don't really have access to in red outside of this. We use our graveyard a little bit, but not enough where we wouldn't be willing to put this in our deck and maybe activate it. So it seems like a necessary evil. So Kenzin, Crucible of Defiance. It's a legendary land. It taps for red, or you can channel it for 3 and a red to create 2 1/1 color spirit creature tokens. They gain haste, and it costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Just, something to do. It's a land that if we really need to, flash in a couple blockers or something, then we can do that. Obviously, this is pretty low impact if we actually channel this, but the cost of including this card in our deck is just an untapped red source, so it's basically nothing. And then lastly, War Room. I love this card. Taps for a colorless. You can pay 3 and tap to pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, so 1 life, to draw a card. Just good mana sink for us if we run out of things to do. Allows us to use our mana to draw cards. Very powerful. And it's basically the cheapest you can get that effect at. All right, next up we have 20 sideboard cards. These are kind of a wide swath of the things that you could consider, but I ended up cutting these are just a wide array of things and different directions that you could go, or extra synergy cards if this deck turns out to need, more of one effect than it has currently. So first up, Astronaut's Altar. If you feel like you need more sack outlets in the deck, then this seems like a good fit for sure. It basically does all the good things that Phyrexian Altar does. But I feel like Phyrexian Altar, the colored mana, is more important for us because it allows us to activate Jaxis again. And like I said, we are pretty pip heavy in terms of red mana. So yeah, definitely if you need another sack outlet, this is the first one I'd go to. Balor, it's got a million words on it. It's from Baldur's Gate. It's 3 red for a 5/5 demon with flying. When it attacks or dies, you choose one or more. Each mode must target a different player. You can have target player draw 3 cards, then discard 3 cards at random. You could have an opponent sacrifice a non-token artifact, or you could have this deal damage to target opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand. Just a big chonky idiot that just does stuff. The last 2 modes are obviously the important ones. You can make people sack their artifacts or deal damage to them. And the attacks and dies is kind of nice. So when you copy this with Jaxis, you will basically get those 2 triggers immediately because it'll come in with haste. You can attack, get the trigger, and then you have to sack at the end of turn. Then you get another trigger. So it's not a bad creature to throw in the deck if you want another chonker. But I just felt we just didn't have enough slots in the deck to have just generically like decent cards when we had to just put more synergy cards in the deck. Big score. I kind of mentioned the sort of card earlier with like Unexpected Windfall and Seize the Spoils and that sort of stuff. This is a card that you could play if you had more discard synergies, I think, or if you just felt like that you wanted more rummaging in the deck, then you could play these sort of cards. But me, I didn't think it was necessary. I didn't think it would give us enough. Chain Reaction, 2 red for a sorcery, deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. This is a pretty solid board wipe for red. If I wanted another creature board wipe, this is the next one I go to. So if you feel like you need another board wipe, here you go. Duplicate, 6 mana for an artifact creature shapeshifter. It's a 2/4 and has imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-token creature. As long as the card exile with duplicates a creature card, this has its power and toughness. So yeah, just a decent little creature. It gives us interaction for other creatures in the form of exile, which is kind of nice. But once again, like I said, with the direction we decided to go with the deck, our opponents having creatures isn't the worst thing because then we can just take them and attack them with them. So yeah, if we feel like we need more creature interaction or something, mostly that, then this is a good card to go to, especially once we start copying it and such. Fable the Mirror Breaker. I'm not going to read through this card. It's extremely powerful, though. It's just kind of slow. It is a good value card. But once again, I just felt like it was better just to include more synergy cards in our deck rather than just putting like generically powerful cards in our deck. But that being said, Fable the Mirror Breaker is an insanely powerful card. People slept on it initially, but obviously it's come around. That's why it's $16 now. But yeah, just a really powerful card. If you just need another powerful card in the deck, I guess you could play this one. Speaking of which, Goldspan Dragon, just a generically powerful card. Makes you mana. It's a threat. It's not a bad card to include. Similar reasons to Balor, but I just didn't end up including it. If you had more treasure synergies and such, then if you started including like big scores and stuff, then I would probably throw in Goldspan as well. Hazoret's Monument. This is an interesting one. It's a 3 mana artifact. It's a legendary artifact. Red creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. This is another highlight if you want to lean into more discard synergies in the deck. Then this can give you some mana discounts while also allowing you to get your discard synergies online. But once again, I felt like that's not the deck that I'm building. Impact Tremors, I talked about it earlier. I like War, Storm Surge, and those sort of effects better for this deck because we aren't producing tons and tons of creatures, so this damage is going to be a little more insignificant than it might otherwise be in other decks. But, it's here. It's an option if you want to run it, as well as Perforos. It's not here in the sideboard, but it basically falls under the same category. But I would probably run Perforos before this in this deck for that reason. Because it's also just a big indestructible beater. In this deck, it will actually be a creature. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Mana Geyser, it's 5 mana that produces a ton of red mana. Doesn't really do anything, though. We go down a card for doing it. And I am worried about the number of cards that we will have access to in a game. So I don't really want to spend a card just for a bunch of mana and not consistent mana. Um, we're not playing like a win the game card that's like 15 mana off this or anything. We might play like one or two 6-drops or something, and that's like good, but I don't know. This card seems a little iffy for me in this deck. I don't feel like I have enough outlets to make this worth playing. Mind Claw Shaman. This is a fun one. It's a 5-mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand, and you may cast instant or sorcery without paying its mana cost from their hand. This is a pretty fun one to copy, and also notably you can tutor it with Imperial Recruiter in the deck, so that's kind of fun. This is just a fun card. It's like if you're to spell slinger heavy meta, then this could be an include. But I don't really want to run the card just like in the deck, because in the games where I draw it, my opponents are like just have a few ramp spells in their deck, and they're like a creature based deck, then this isn't really going to do anything. So it's kind of awkward. I mean, worst case scenario, you could throw it away to Jaxis, I guess, but that feels kind of bad. So yeah, all that being said, this is a fun card that you could definitely include. I kind of cut it last minute from the deck, but it is fun. Keep this one in mind for sure. Mirror Battlesphere. It's a 7-mana 4/7 artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield, you create 4 1/1 colors mirror artifact creature tokens, and when it attacks, you can tap those mirror if you want to give it extra power and deal damage to defending player equal to the number that you tap. Just a big idiot. Produces a pretty wide board. It's a good card to copy. Makes tons of mirror. Then you could tap all of those mirror to dome your opponents for a ton. Yeah, just a decent big idiot to copy. But once again, wasn't really the synergy that I wanted to do. But it is just a chonky idiot if you want to run that. Panharmonicon. Duplicates enter the battlefield triggers of creatures and artifacts. Just not for our deck. The build that we have, I don't think we're going to have any problems taking our opponent's creatures. I don't think we really need to duplicate those triggers necessarily. We'll be able to duplicate those triggers by just copying the creature with Jaxis. So I don't think this is necessary, but maybe if you're at a creature heavy meta and you can't take all of the creatures, and you consistently have 3+ creatures that you can take from your opponents, then maybe you can include this. But yeah, I just didn't find it necessarily. Generally, when I want to play Panharmonicon, it's if I'm playing like Mold Drifters and stuff that's actually going to gain me card advantage. But if like I said, if you're in a creature heavy meta and you can generate actual advantage from having your opponents have so many creatures that you can take on the battlefield, then it could be a nice include. Priest of Urbrask, 2 and a red for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you create 3 red mana. Cute little card for the deck. It can kind of pseudo ramp us because it gets you your mana back immediately when you play this, and then you can duplicate it with Jaxis to kind of ramp 2 mana temporarily. Because you'll pay 3 for this, you get your 3 back. You pay 1, you get another 1. So well, actually it'd be more like 5 mana, I guess. But it generates you a lot of mana. But similar reason to why I didn't really like Mana Geyser. All it does is produce mana. This one's at least on a creature, but doesn't produce as much mana. So, yeah. Same reason I cut Mana Geyser, basically. Ruin Grinder. This is an interesting one. 5 and a red for a 7/4 artifact creature construct that has Menace. When it dies, each player may discard their hand and then draw 7. And it has Mountain Cycling for 2 generic, which means you can discard it and search your deck for a mountain and put it in your hand. Cool card. If I decide that I wanted another wheel sort of effect for the deck, this would be a good one to go to. It's a good card to copy and, wheel our hand and such. And worst case scenario, you can just pitch it for a mountain or to activate Jaxis. So it's got some flexibility here. But just a little clunky and, felt like I had better things to do for the mana. 1,000-Year Elixir. It's 3 mana for an artifact. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste, and you could pay 1 and tap to untap target creature. This is kind of the stand-in for Illusionist or Archmage's Bracers. That's it. Similar reasons to why I almost cut that card is that really the only activated ability that we have is our commander. And sure, giving that activation haste is kind of nice, and being able to activate it again potentially is nice. But at least the Bracers gives us the flexibility of giving something else haste if we need to, which can be useful, even though it's kind of mana intensive, just like this is. However, this card just isn't flexible like that one is. So even though the other one's a little more mana intensive, I felt like this is worth the cut compared to where the bracers wasn't. Um, yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with this card. If you have more creatures with more activated abilities in the deck, then I could see it. But if you're only including this for Jaxis, I'd rather run the bracers, and the bracers may even end up getting cut anyway. Um, so yeah, this one it didn't make the cut for that reason for me. Unexpected Windfall, same thing as Big Score. If you want more of this effect, it's here. Witty Roastmaster, this is kind of a similar one to Impact Tremors. It's 2 and a red for a 3/2 Devil Citizen. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals 1 damage to each opponent. So just little pings just aren't going to add up to a whole lot. But I will say at least this one's a creature compared to Impact Tremors, so we can duplicate this and start dealing 2 for each creature that enter the battlefield. But at that point, I really hope we have better things to copy at that point than a Witty Roastmaster. So yeah, for that reason, same reason Impact Tremors got cut. But I would run this one before Impact Tremors, and I'd run Perforos before this. And then lastly, Wormcoil Engine. Just another big chonker idiot. Pet card of mine. Good card to copy because then you sack it and then you get left with something. You get left with 2 Worm creature tokens that are annoying to attack into. So yeah, once again, just another big chonker if you want a big chonker. But I felt like the big chonkers that we had added more synergy to the deck. So I cut it. So yeah, that's the deck. That's the Jaxis Threaten deck. It's a deck based around stealing your opponent's creatures to remove them out of the way of blocking, then hitting them with all the creatures that you have, while hopefully copying things with Jaxis, maybe the creatures that you stole from them, and then you can sack them all and not give them back and get extra advantage and such. So pretty cool little mono red deck here. Has a lot of flexibility, a lot of play to it, interaction in unique ways. So yeah, hopefully you guys like this deck. Once again, hopefully we'll get more of the battle, excuse me, the jumpstart set spoiled, and hopefully there's some legends in there for us to brew with, because I wasn't really crazy excited about a lot of the Brothers War legendaries, as they're just pretty generically powerful. So yeah, that being said, that's the video. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you all have a great Thanksgiving, and cheers to y'all.